In this lesson, we'll talk about the creation, use, and benefits of queries. A query element can be designed as a modular business object. Queries can contain one or more tables as a data source. These tables may be nested within each other if they are related, like in the screenshot. We have a FMT customer table and an FMT customer group table nested and related to that table below it. Queries are flexible because they are easily changed and can be modified at runtime. For example, a report that uses a query as a data source can have parameters set dynamically at runtime before the report is executed. You can also change other options like ordering by certain fields at runtime as well. A query object can then be reused as a data source to provide data for other forms and reports in the system. So now let's go ahead and add a query element to our project. Now we discussed a bit about queries and how they are very flexible and very reusable. They're a good data source that we can reuse for forms and reports. And they also allow us to specify details at runtime before we execute them. So if we right click our project again, we can choose add and we'll add new item. Now queries live here in the data model element type group just above table. So we'll select it and we'll type a name for our query. We'll call it DB vehicle query because I want this query to be based off my vehicle table. I'll add it. We have our new folder here with the query element itself, and it's opened here in the element designer. So let's go ahead first of all and give it a title. So we'll set that property. We'll just call it vehicles. Okay, now the data sources node specifies which table or tables we're going to have as a data source for this query. I can go to my project and open up my tables folder and simply drag a table to the data sources node. So now I have my DB vehicle table as my data source. If I expand the data source itself, we can see there's fields which specify what fields we want to include from that table in this query. By default, none are added. We can right click and choose new, and we can choose a field, and then this will allow us to specify which table in the query that we want the field to come from, and then which field that we're going to add. So I can see here in my drop down that I'm going to have different options for choosing the tables and fields. So here's all the fields I can add. I can add them one by one to choose only a subset of fields that I want in this query. Maybe I have a specific purpose for this query that's only going to use a couple fields. So we can go ahead and manually add fields to the query simply by right clicking and choosing new field. We also have the option to have some of these aggregate features in a query. If we want to sum up a field from our table, we can also have that feature. So I'm going to delete this manual fields real quick. And there's another option we can use for queries, which is called the dynamic fields. So if I choose my DB vehicle data source table and I go to the properties, there's an option here called dynamic fields, and by default it's unselected. We need to set this to yes or no. If I set it to yes, it dynamically adds all of the fields, including system fields, from my DB vehicle table into the data source for my query. Now the benefit of this is if in the future I decide to add more fields to my vehicle table, they will dynamically update here in my query that has that table as a data source. So it's important to note if that feature would suit you. Okay, so we can go ahead and close up these tabs here and we'll save our query. Okay, so now I'm going to add one more query to this project. So I'll right click my project again and repeat the steps by going to add, new item, choosing query from the data model artifact group, and give it a name. We'll call this one DB vehicle maintenance. And it goes ahead and adds a new query here to my simple queries folder, and it opens in the element designer by default. So what I want to do with this query is first of all add a data source. Now in my last vehicle query, I added the vehicle table as the single and only data source. For this one, I want to add both the DB vehicle and the DB maintenance table. To do that, I'll first click my DB vehicle table and drag it to the data sources node. When I expand this data source, I have some different options here, and we can see another data sources node exists. This gives me the option to create a nested data source, and that's what I want to do for my DB maintenance table. I want it to be a nested data source within my DB vehicle table. So I'll drag that out to this data sources node, and we can see if I continue to expand this nested data source, there are options to continually add more and more data sources within data sources. So when I create this nested data source within my DB vehicle main data source, I need to specify a relationship between them so that these data sources know how they are related and they can communicate that way. So I'll right click my relations node in my nested data source and choose new relation. I'll go to the properties pane over here and set a few properties to set up the relation. Firstly, I'll go to the field property and use the drop down to specify which field in my DB maintenance nested data source I want to use in the relation, and that's going to be the vehicle ID field. For join data source, if I click the drop down, we'll notice we only have the DB vehicle table as an option because that's the only other data source in this query, and it's the parent data source for this nested data source. So I'll choose that. And then in the related field property, I'll choose which field from this join data source parent that I want to use in the relation. In other words, which field in the DB vehicle table I'm going to relate to the vehicle ID field in the maintenance table. And that field is the same name in both places, DB vehicle ID. So once I finish choosing those properties, we can see it populates here this relation, the details. DB vehicle table .db vehicle ID field equals the DB maintenance table and the DB vehicle ID field. So that's exactly what I wanted. The last thing I'll do is just give this join relation a name, and I'll just call it the vehicle ID relation. And I can go ahead and save this query. Some last things to note about queries are these different options here. We already discussed adding fields to a data source and other data sources within a data source. We also have the option within these data sources to add a range, which is created on a field or fields and specifies a searchable range or parameter for the query. And then we also have the group by having an order by. For group by and order by, we can specify which field we want the data to be ordered by in the query, or which field we want the data to be grouped by in the query.